Well, I guess y'all have, I guess, obviously spoken. This is Madelaine. Madelaine, this is Sky.
Hi.
Hey,
Um,
finally face to face
I
in
know,
person.
kind of sucks.
yeah. Um, I guess, yeah, I guess we can jump on into it. I'm pretty pumped about doing this one.
Yeah,
You wrote an essay about Caligari, right?
I did in grad school. It was I actually was trying to reread it just briefly before before we started this because I haven't watched it since, two and a half years ago. So I was just trying to remember, like, what did I write? What were some of the things that I wanted to talk about? And I luckily have been refreshed, so I think I'm good to go.
Good. All right. Well, then I guess we'll jump right on into it.
Cool.
Cool. Hey there, Film Buds. Welcome back to the Film Buds podcast. I am your host, Paul, and I have two guests with us today. The first one is friend of the show, Sky Tilley.
Hey.
There we go.
Yeah, that's me.
And then we're also joined by a first-time guest, my sister and writer, published writer, marketer, and also semi-professional athlete, Madelaine Davis.
You made me sound significantly more qualified than I am, but I'm excited to be here.
She's been in a Facebook televised roller derby bout.
I've been actually we're in a Netflix.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you guys want to, I don't know why you would, but if you ever want to watch some big track roller derby, the Netflix docu-series Home Game, I think we're like episode 3 or 4. You can see me smash my face into the track and split my chin open. It's very exciting stuff.
Yeah, see? So she's just as qualified as I described.
That sounds horrific.
Part of the price of sport, I suppose.
I mean, I guess.
Depending on the sport.
Depending on the sport. Most sports I like intentionally didn't do anymore because like if it was remotely contact sport, I would foul out of the game. But in roller derby, you're supposed to foul out. Like you're supposed to hit people. So that's really fun for me.
Cool.
Yeah,
just a very violent person.
Incredibly.
And that's why the horror genre is perfect for her.
And that's why that works.
And that's why we're all here to talk about horror.
Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of sports real fast, I played basketball very recreationally, not professionally, not even on a team. I was just playing. Someone passed me the basketball, jammed my finger, haven't picked up a basketball since. So I can't imagine doing what you do. I think that's just wild. Awesome.
No, yeah, it certainly isn't something that I would do. I used to do contact sports and not so much. But it's an exciting time. This is the first time that these two have met before. But they're both people who are very into horror, and they're both people who have opinions that I respect and value. Madelaine is one of the first people that got me into watching some horror films growing up. And we've been to several since. One of my favorites is our Sunday morning viewing of The Witch, when we went to it in theaters while everyone was at church.
Oh, yeah.
That was great.
Yeah. And Sky actually wrote an essay on one of the two films that we're going to be talking about, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a decent essay, if I had to say so. I thought it was okay.
It was incredible, and I'm certain of it. Sight unseen, I know it was tremendous. But no, I think that it's going to be a good time. I decided that we should go back. We recently have done some older content on the show. We did The Invisible Man from the 30s. We did Casablanca from the 40s. We did 2 films from the 50s. So we've recently been going and doing some more historic stuff, and I wanted to have our Halloween month be kind of like, a nice grab bag of a lot of different types of content. So it felt appropriate to go back to like the silent era, because I don't think that a lot of people think about the silent era having horror films.
In
I
my
just
opinion, I think the silent era of horror films, especially German expressionist horror films, I think they're in some ways far more terrifying than what we see today. And I think it was because of the practical use and just the limitations that they had on film productions.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, we talked a little bit. We weren't talking about horror films specifically. I think maybe we were talking about. Actually, I think Lord of the Rings. But we were talking just the other day about how, like, I really think practical effects are more terrifying a lot of times, and they definitely hold up so much better than CGI, which I know everyone like goes hard nowadays for CGI. But I agree with you.
No.
Actually, I think a lot of like old black and white films, a lot of like old silent films. Well, for one thing, I think, it's easy now for us to look back at these things and be like, well, that's not that terrifying, or like, I've seen this plot like a million times. But remembering the fact that like for a lot of these films, that was like the first time people were seeing this like particular plot, or getting that particular story. And yeah, I think even just, we were talking like Nosferatu and the use of the different kind of like color filters to symbolize different times of day and kind of create these different moods and things like that, or like sort of the set pieces in like Caligari, and just like so much more creative the way they used the space around them to sort of really invoke particular moods. I think it's very atmospheric, and I think sometimes modern films miss some of that atmospheric element.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know you guys just mentioned The Witch, but Eggers, he does such a great job at bringing you to that atmosphere. His movies are very not for everybody. I completely get that. But if you want to talk about atmosphere and capturing that perfect creepy moment, he's a master at it.
No, for sure. So the Sky mentioned German expressionism. That's the sort of time period, I guess, specifically that we're dealing with both of our films, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, which are both from the 1920s, 1920 and 1922. And they are both kind of perfect examples of the genre, but in very different ways that they tackle it. And one of them, of course, has its own mythology around it, and the production of it that has become also a film itself, Nosferatu. There have been like multiple Nosferatu remakes and that sort of thing, which is interesting since it's just a Dracula ripoff. But we can get into that further. But kind of without ado, we don't have a clip. It's a silent film, and I didn't think that there was really any point. So
play the clip. Play the clip. We'll wait.
So I think that we'll just sort of jump right into it with we'll go chronologically with The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And Sky, do you want? I'll give us, of course, the synopsis and the cast and everything. The synopsis is: hypnotist Dr. Caligari uses a somnambulist, Caesar, to commit murders. Directed by Robert Vine, and starring Werner Krauss, Conrad Veidt as Caesar, Friedrich Fehr, Lil Dagover, Hans Heinrich von Twardowski, and Rudolf Lettinger.
I'm like 60% sure you pronounce those names correctly.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll take the 60.
I'll give you 60.
Take it away, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so I watched this film at UNCG. We had the same instructor, I think, Frank Donaldson, and he showed it. And I kind of immediately fell in love with it. I grew up being a big Tim Burton fan and hadn't really ever been exposed to German expressionist films. When I saw this, I was like, okay, this is obviously a huge inspiration for Tim Burton. Like this film, the way that they use geometric shapes and shadows and chiaroscuro lighting, like all of it really just adds up to this is Tim Burton right here. If he was a filmmaker in the 1920s, he would have made something like this. So it had a big effect on me. And then when I went to grad school, we were doing an international history of film, and this was one of the ones that we tackled for Germany, obviously. And I was like, okay, great. I loved this film. I hadn't seen it in a while. I'll watch it again. And then the professor for the class was like, now you're gonna have to write a paper on one of two film. You're gonna have to write two papers this semester, one on one film and one on a different film. And I knew I wanted to write something on Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It was a difficult paper, obviously, because in 1920, there's not a lot of information that you can really dig into. But what I did find interesting about this was how I believe it to be an allegory for World War I, which I think is very interesting if you really think about it in that context. And I can explain that a little bit further. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this film, and I would love to hear what you guys think first.
Yeah, man, why don't?
Okay, yeah, no. So I think I saw this movie actually this year for the first time ever. I got a Shudder account and started going through like old horror films because they have like a whole collection of them, like what is it, White Zombie and Dr. Caligari and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, you know, I saw it and I immediately actually really loved it. We were talking last night about which one we liked more, Caligari or Nosferatu, and yeah, I really loved Caligari. I loved the sort of like framing for the story where it opens with, you know, you think you're talking to this man about this like tragic event that happened in his past, and you know, then you kind of go back into the story itself, and then of course, you know, I guess I was about to say no spoilers, but also like that movie came out.
It's 100 years old.
It's literally
yeah. So spoilers. So yeah, of course you find out in the end that like he's one of the patients at the asylum, and this whole thing is just kind of like this elaborate sort of like delusion. And yeah, I loved it, and I loved just the hyper stylized set, the makeup for everyone. Like it was just so beautifully done. It really did such a great job of just like, again, the framing of the storytelling itself, but also those visual aspects did such a great job of really like drawing you in. And then again, thinking back on it and thinking about the fact that it is kind of like this one person solution, and how perception of reality can be so distorted, and like kind of seeing that in like a very visual sense for me, I thought that was like a super fascinating, really cool. I don't know, I really loved it. I really liked the whole thing. No notes. It was great. Well done.
No, I think that, you know, it's obviously like one of the earliest examples of this sort of story that at this point we're familiar with. You know, the it turns out that they were the insane one, but it does so in such this, you know, very interesting way. You know, it's very theatrical, obviously, because the whole thing is structured in acts like a play would be. And so it has this kind of way of snaking back around to just like a play would, to this kind of surprise reveal, you know, in the final act, you know, the sixth act. Oh, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that it really, really works in favor of the story. It's such a specific film visually that, like, you know, you see it once and you immediately have those visuals kind of stuck in your head. Because even though you've seen things like it before, it's kind of like you finally saw the first version of them, you know, for the first time on a certain level. Kind of like why going back to the first Jurassic Park always still has its wonder when you see the dinosaurs again. You know, it's because that's the first version of this thing on screen, and it's presented very splendidly. You know, they don't try to hide the fact that you can see the sets. They lean into it. You know,
all 4 set pieces.
Yeah.
There's like 4 set pieces throughout the whole movie.
But it's pretty incredible, you know, that they just sort of throw such abandon to the wind, you know, and you're aware of the fact that everything that you're looking at is unreal, but it doesn't matter because it's very much intentionally doing that. And so you can ignore it and you can pay attention to what the story actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if the only thing that's truly a bummer on this thing is that I need someone to come in with a better score. That thing, that music is just so blink a dink a dink, dink a dink a dink.
There are a few. Yeah, there are a few versions on YouTube you can find that have different music with them. I think if you find the one on like Tubi or a streaming service, it's probably a little bit more of like, whichever one that they chose. But there's some great ones on YouTube where they did a pretty good job with some scoring. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's they did so much with very little, right? Like, I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, it is like 4 set pieces throughout the whole movie. There's very minimal lighting. But when it is lighting, it's very harsh. You got that chiaroscuro lighting that they use. But also, I think when we're going back and you're watching these old classic films, you have to look at theme, right? And I think, if we were to talk about, how this is potentially an allegory for World War One. Well, Germany had just lost World War One, right? And they were hitting it hard. And the peak age, or so science seems to think, is 23. So I am far beyond peak age. I am practically dead at this point. But 23 was the peak age, and Caesar has been asleep for 23 years. So when he wakes up, it's safe to assume that the guy is 23 years old, and his first command is to kill for me, right? Caligari says kill. And I think it's kind of interesting if you think about it. You have German soldiers enlisting, and they're ordered to kill, right? And then you actually have another moment. I think the character's name was Alan, but he asked Caesar, when will I die? That's what he wants to know. It's his burning question. And Caesar replies, "You die at dawn." And it's very interesting if you think about it. Right after World War One, like that was all that was on their minds, really. It wasn't really escapism. It was, let's talk about this horrific thing. And a lot of soldiers, they didn't see dawn. So I think it's very interesting if you think about it, how Caesar kind of represents the German soldier. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a super interesting point, and I wonder too how that kind of impacted. I mean, you talked again about like the very harsh angles, the intense lighting. It's a depiction of the world as like a very harsh, at times kind of frightening, like visually, sort of like representation of like this notion of, to your point, like the horrors of war and maybe disillusionment with society and life, coming back from that and coming out of that. And so I think, definitely you can see that both in the storytelling elements and, I wonder how much that impacted even some of those visual choices as well.
Yeah, well, the whole big theme, right, is madness, is people going mad and crazy. So I think, hysteria was definitely on their minds, especially right after that. But another thing they did visually that I thought was very interesting too, is how people of power are on elevated platforms. And you have the main character, I don't remember his name right now, but everyone is so small. You have the police, they're sitting high. You have the psych wards, they're sitting high. If you want to get to the hospital, you have to ascend some stairs. Everything else is low on the ground. It's just very interesting how they tackled class and society as well, especially in the grand scheme once you know the twist.
But I think also the sitting up high almost makes them look childish, because the way that he has to like tuck up his feet, it almost looks like a child sitting in a high chair.
Feels like a false sense of authority almost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's up high, but it's undermined by how clownish it makes you look, and the way that you have to like clamber down to get down to my level.
Yeah.
No, that's a really astute and interesting about them being up high. I hadn't really considered that. That was a really good point. And then like going back to it being, him being an allegory for the soldier, when you finally do get to the reveal of the reality at the end, he's also almost kind of shell-shocked.
Mm.
You know, he doesn't speak, he doesn't really interact, he just kind of is there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like he's almost suffering from some form of like PTSD a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, super intriguing. And I do think it is really interesting too, just from the standpoint of like, because they do talk about like coming out of like World War I and World War II with this idea of like being shell shocked and mental illness, and how like, I mean, even now in modern times, like there's still so many stigmas around mental illness and like not dealing with like things like soldiers with PTSD and the difficulty of reintegrating back into society. And also just, yeah, I mean, like both world wars were, especially over in like places like Europe where they were enacted, or the Pacific, I mean, whole populations experienced that. And I even think, you know, like, yeah, he might be the sort of like embodiment of the soldier, but like thinking too about like all of those characters, because I think his like what's her name, Jane, is also, she ends up in the asylum as well. Just like they talk about, you know, whole generations of people essentially like decimated and reeling and trying to make sense of life in the world again after the fallout of World War One.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
You know, I'm trying to remember, like I said, it's been a little bit since I have seen it, but the end, is there like an ending frame of Caligari kind of looking at the camera and you don't know if he's really bad or if he's really good?
I'm trying to remember. I think maybe.
Do you remember
I don't
the
remember.
last frame of the movie? Of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari? What's does it end on Caligari? Oh yes.
I think it does.
Yes, it ends with
face, right?
It ends with the doctor finishing out and he goes, and I know exactly how to cure him.
Yeah, that's right.
And it just sort of stops there. And it actually, if you watch it, it's like a ... that ends it. It's not even like a period. It's an ellipses.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was almost, I think, you know, I think it works, but I wonder if it works better if, you know, I think they had to have that kind of like horrific moment, like, oh my God, is he really crazy? Is he not really crazy? But at the same time, I think it kind of undoes a little bit of what they set up before with Caesar being at the hospital and all these other characters being at the hospital.
Classic horror movie ending problem. You decide to go for the ambiguous thing.
I know.
And it ruins the whole damn thing.
Yeah, it's crazy how long that trope has been around. You know, it's nothing new. It's crazy. You know, I think what's interesting too about this movie is there are a lot of static shots, right? Like you couldn't really move around this gigantic camera. And I think you had to rely on close-ups and some medium shots. But for the most part, like when you get in on Caligari's eyes behind those goggles, those thick goggles, and he looks like the penguin from Batman Returns, he looks just like Danny DeVito. And I'm like, you know, I get creeped out just when I see him and he's just wondering, his eyes just wondering. It's very effective, even today, I think.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, to your point, you know, the set pieces were pretty minimum. There's not a whole lot of like graphics or other things you can rely on. And so like the actors themselves just do such a phenomenal job of just like, and again, like this is like no sound, no audio, but just with like their faces doing such an incredible job of like conveying an eeriness. And yeah, like his character throughout the whole thing was super unnerving. And yeah, like watching him, or again, even like last night watching like Nosferatu, like Max, like what's his, the actor Max Schreck, he's like super creepy. All of his movements are so unsettling. I think there's just like such a wonderful job those actors did of you know, just with like tiny face movements or just the way they move their bodies, like conveying such like an eerie otherworld sort of quality.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that Germany and German cinema in the early, you know, part of the 20th century, you look at their horror films like this, but then you also look at their sort of thrillers like M, where they're tackling these very, very lofty social concepts through very grounded, very interesting storytelling. You know, because M is about mob justice. You know, this movie is about madness. Nosferatu is about, you know, sexuality and lust and things like that, and sexual impropriety. And so they're very interesting, and they're very fascinating performers. You know, you look at all of the actors across all of these films, and they know how to imbue it with a certain theatricality that's necessary for all of these stories, and they find that weird unsettling place across all three of those films, you know, that just makes them lasting and memorable and chilling.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you know, the scene where Caesar comes to kill the girl, you know, he almost dances his way to her with that lighting and those shadows and those geometric shapes. It really does kind of put you on edge, and it's just awesome, I think, just how they were able to capture that.
And that kind of movement is far past the notion of being a sleepwalker. You know, the idea of a somnambulist as like just a sleepwalker, you know, it was really more this idea of essentially like a night stalker. That was using this sort of pat language to cover it. But he's way more than walking. It is very nimble, very lithe sort of movement, dancer-like.
And I don't remember,
like a Doug
but
Jones performance.
I don't remember, but at the end, yeah, very much like a Doug Jones performance. At the end, you know, you see Caesar, and he's holding the flowers. Does he mention that he was like a dancer? Does Caligari mention that this is such and such? He was a dancer or a performer or something. I don't remember. I could be just kind of like looking into that more than I don't remember.
I can't rember off the top of my head.
I think he does give like brief descriptions as to who these characters are.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what all he said. But yeah,
no,
I mean,
they do all tie in for sure.
Yeah, they all tie into some of like their behaviors in this kind of like story. For sure.
Yeah, I love how this movie starts and ends though. Like, it's such a great button for the beginning. You have him sitting, it looks like he's at like a cemetery, and he's talking to this old guy, and then at the very end it's like, oh, they're in a courtyard right in the mental hospital. I just thought that was just so good. Brilliant.
Yeah, well, and I liked it too because and maybe I'm remembering this incorrectly, but I also feel like that courtyard, that opening scene, and even in the end, up until they go back into the asylum, like it felt more like grounded in reality. Like you could just kind of be like outside somewhere. But then, yeah, once you get into this story, it becomes like hyper stylized.
No, for sure. I think it's a really great movie. It's one that I think about a lot. It's not one that I watch a lot, but I do think that it is a fascinating film, and I think that it's definitely worth bringing to people's attention, you know, so they can go back and see where so many things were born, and where so many people were influenced. And I can get into a little bit on why this film in particular, not this film, but German film in particular, I guess part of the reason that it was so influential. I'll do the history lesson now. Why not? Part of the reason it was so influential was, first of all, there was an agreement between Paramount Studios and UFA, the German National Cinema group, called the Perufamet Agreement, that essentially allowed for American films to be distributed in Germany and German films to be distributed in America. And it influenced a lot of American filmmakers in the 20s who then went on to make films in the 30s and 40s and onward. Furthermore, because of World War II, you had, of course, a mass exodus of a lot of German talent that left from that film world to Hollywood. Third, Alfred Hitchcock actually worked in German cinema during the 20s and was very influenced. And fourth of all, obviously, you just have the fact that there was an audience who grew up watching these people who were influenced by these things, who went back and looked at where it all came from. And that's where you get to people like Tim Burton. So that's kind of how these things became so influential in a very crash course way.
Yeah.
But they still have so much value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know it's been over 20 years at this point, but, Rob Zombie's video for Living Dead Girl copies The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari completely. Like, he does his own retelling of it. So, I mean, there's some great staying power with these films.
Yeah.
And like you said, go ahead. No, you're fine.
Fair, like, watching it when I first saw Caligari too, I was like, oh, like Shutter Island's kind of whole plot definitely riffs very heavily off of this.
Yeah. But like you were saying, is this isn't a film that you can just go back and just watch every couple of years, something like that. It's more of like, okay, I just want to sit down, and if you want to view it analytically, through that kind of lens and not really through like an audience lens, then I think it's a great film. Very much like the 1976 Dawn of the Dead. Was it 78? 76? The old one. The Romero one.
Dear, is Romero's Dawn of the Dead 76 or 77?
78.
It's 78.
78. Okay. What a great year for horror. Okay.
Yeah. Wait.
What is it?
She's second guessing it.
If it came out the same year as Halloween, that's a great year.
Huh?
I thought it did. I thought it came out the same year as Halloween. Because weren't they were both like relatively like low budget horror films, and I think they came out the same year. Yeah. That's what I thought.
I have Google. Yeah.
Fact check.
I'm on my laptop. I can check.
No, yeah. I agree with you. I think that it's definitely one of those touchstone films that you look at from an analytical perspective. So Sky, if you had to rate it out of 5, what would you give it?
I'd give it a 5. I would. I'd give it a 5. Based off of, do I enjoy it? Sure. But I enjoy it as, like an appreciative person of film, right? It's not like, oh, this is a great popcorn flick. It's something where I'm like, man, they did so much for so little. Like, this is a stage production that they filmed, and they did it very well. It's a very compelling story. And like you said, it is Shutter Island. And I love Shutter Island. So, yeah, I think it's a 5.
Okay. Mad, what about you?
I agree. I really think I've got to give it a 5 too. Yeah, I don't know if this is just like turn your mind off, eat some popcorn, and watch kind of a flick, but I don't know. Like, I think the storytelling's so wonderful. It's like such a cool, intriguing premise. And visually, I think it's just like so like arresting. I really like the visuals of it. Yeah, I have to give it a 5. I really love it, honestly.
Okay. I'll be the contrarian here.
Wow. Okay.
4.5.
Wow.
You have to explain what knocked off the half point.
Just because I don't want to watch it every once in a while. Nosferatu is one, even though I think that there is less going on for it at a certain narrative level. But I'll get into that in a little while. I don't want to, put the cart before the horse.
I can say real fast, it is more visually interesting in terms of location.
Yeah.
With Nosferatu, with Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, it's like, okay, we're back at the same set we were just at. There's only so much you can do,
I think that for me, it's just that little bit of, I don't want to watch it this year, kind of like attitude, like if someone was like, we're going to watch it, I'd be like, no, we're not.
That's fair.
And that's the only thing.
That's okay.
But honestly, like, and I'm just being a stickler. I'm just being a curmudgeon. But moving on, we now have our next film from 2 years later, Nosferatu, and the premise is just the plot of Dracula. I'm not even honestly going to read you what it says. It's just the plot of Dracula. If you know, idiot real estate agent goes to castle, gets ensnared by weird European man. Weird European man comes back to try and have sex with his wife. That's the plot of Dracula and Nosferatu.
Yeah.
And that's because, for a little history, F.W. Murnau, the director of the film, tried to go and get the rights to Dracula, and the Stoker family said no.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, then I'm just going to do a little copy paste, change the names. And so Dracula became Orlok, played infamously by Max Schreck. And then you also have Alexander Granach, Gustav von Wagenheim, and Greta Schroeder.
70%. 70% this time.
I know which name messed me up, and I accept it. But overall, I'll actually start this one. So Nosferatu, the first time that I saw it, was the 11th grade in high school film class. Eric Whiteside was my teacher, and he wanted to do a Halloween double feature for the month of October. You know, you only had like 45 minutes for the period, so you couldn't really watch a whole movie. And he wanted to do a double feature of Nosferatu and Shadow of the Vampire, the film about the fictional film about the making of Nosferatu. And I loved it. I thought that it was the best shit I had ever seen.
Is that the one with Willem Dafoe?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Willem Dafoe and John Malkovich. And so it was incredible. And he told me, he told the whole class the story of how F.W. Murnau tried to hype up the publicity of the film by insisting that he had found an actual vampire to play a vampire. And he really went out of his way to just like be his own press agent. And Murnau was kind of like, by some people's definition, a little bit of like a snake oil salesman of a filmmaker. Like, he drummed up his success.
An early day viral marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like some Blair Witch.
Yeah.
This is found footage.
They're really dead.
Yeah. It's a snuff film.
Don't mind that they're going to be appearing on the Tonight Show. It's totally fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
They're dead.
They're dead. It's real.
But no, and like it ended up becoming like a whole thing where some people were like, it's not a vampire, but it's also not Max Schreck. It's a pseudonym for a different actor. Like it really just took off. And that's also why if you watch these movies on Shudder, both of them are from the Murnau Foundation, is because that son of a bitch ended up making a name.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it on, I think, what did I watch it on? Tubi. I think I watched it on Tubi. I wish I would have known it was on Shudder. I would have watched it on Shudder. So what's interesting, I don't know about the one that you guys watched, but the one on Tubi, they actually use the names from Bram Stoker's Dracula. They don't use the names from Nosferatu. So when I went back and I looked at the synopsis, which is something I typically do whenever I watch a movie, is I'll go back and just read the synopsis. And they're using the names from Nosferatu. I'm like, hang on. What did I watch? Do I need to go back and watch the real movie at this point? But yeah, it was wild.
Yeah.
That must be some sort of weird holdover, I guess, of like the settlement in some capacity.
I mean, the whole time we were watching it, I was like, it's discount Van Helsing. It's like
they say Van Helsing in Nosferatu. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it's very, very. Also, you mentioned earlier, just an aside, that you thought the Insane Asylum director made you think of Danny DeVito, and also the guy who played like the vampire's little
Knock.
That's it. I was like, also made me think of Danny DeVito. Is there some sort of like 1920s horror film? What if Danny DeVito's actually a vampire?
You know what? This actually now does make a lot of sense for the aesthetic of
the
Penguin in Batman Returns.
Yeah. I actually had to pause it and look it up to see if it was the same actor. And it is not Danny DeVito.
I know. And it's
Yeah, no, I agree though. I mean, they did. They both looked the exact same. It's crazy.
Yeah. But honestly, like as far as Dracula stories go, it's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's great.
I mean, I think it's so. This one, obviously, I think visually, with the exception of Nosferatu himself, is like way more grounded in reality.
Oh yeah.
Just like visually, which I think kind of obviously makes Nosferatu the character stick out like way more. And also, then the whole time I was watching this movie, I was like, why are you not immediately disturbed by this?
Dude tried to drink your blood off of your finger. He's like,
I'm
go
pretty
to
sure
sleep.
he did.
Go
I'm
to
pretty
sleep.
sure that he did like get full contact.
Unsettling. And I mean,
The guy's like, oh, I'm gonna back away from you, but oh, you want me to sit down and go to sleep? I'll do that.
okay,
That's fine.
all right,
Mhm.
that seems reasonable. No sense of stranger danger whatsoever in this man.
No, Hutter, and I could be mistaken about this. I still haven't looked into it, but if I'm not mistaken, Hutter essentially is kind of almost like the name Wickus in District 9. It's kind of like the name of like a fucking simpleton.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that that's kind of the whole gag of him being called Hutter.
He had all the wrong reactions to everything throughout that whole movie. I was like, sir, no.
I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about watching both of these movies back to back is how you also see early in the silent film era, Caligari is almost a little bit clunky in the sense of like these massive blocks, paragraphs of text that you just kind of have to like sift through, Yeah. Whereas this manages to actually become something more like a modern cinematic experience of letting things play out using quicker dialogue.
I think the pacing's better. I think it's like a much tighter told story than Caligari is. And to that end, it feels like a little bit more heading towards like modern blockbustery, kind of like a little zippier, a little bit, less text heavy. For sure.
But I think that also stems from the fact that he is just, no offense to Murnau, I think that also stems from the fact that he is just stealing. Like he's stealing a working story, whereas Caligari is, of course, like presenting you something totally new.
Yeah. Yeah, I did enjoy Nosferatu. Again, this is the first time I watched it. So I knew what to expect, obviously, because I'm like, oh, I know it's Dracula. I didn't realize that it was the exact same story as Dracula. That was a surprise. But it was like, okay, this is fine. What I found interesting and what I was trying to watch it, and I haven't really had time to really look into to do all the research on it that I would normally do. But trying to look at movies from that time and trying to figure out like, okay, where were their headspaces at? Like what were they trying to say about the world? And obviously, you spoke about like thematically, it was about virginity, purity, lust. But I also think it does a good job at kind of showing what we're dealing with today to an extent. Like they were dealing with an epidemic.
There's the plague plot.
The plague plot, where Nosferatu actually brings the rat plague there. And obviously there was the rat plague that, the bubonic plague and, them bringing all the rats over and all that stuff. But also, I think you can get a little bit more sinister with it. I'd have to do a lot of research. But what I was getting out of it was almost like in the realm of offense and what Germany was heading toward, especially with like World War II and hate speech and things like that. And I think it was really me probably looking at like films like Inglourious Bastards and other films about World War II, and specifically calling Jewish people, like rats, and equating them to like rats. And if you look at the design of Nosferatu himself, he does look like he has rat characteristics.
Yeah.
And he's
And a big
influencing, right? And he comes from a ship and he's spreading disease and influence. And I'm like, I really don't know if this is like a hate speech, but like I could see them actually using it later on as like reference to the German people being
That's
like,
an interesting read.
Yeah.
That was what came out of my head when I was watching it.
Necessarily,
none of the plague stuff is, if I'm recalling correctly, I don't remember that really happening in like the OG Dracula story. See, I think that is super interesting. I think I read it a little bit more as sort of like social contagion and this concept of fear and how that can be like a plague and sort of spread through a place. But like I hadn't thought about that read at all. It's a super interesting thought.
I don't know what's the thought got into my head, and it really was, Inglourious Bastards, and he's talking about the rat, the Jew rat, essentially. And I was just
this
like,
foreign influence.
Yeah.
I was like, I really don't know if this is what they're doing, but maybe.
This ancient, wealthy, evil power that moves in and ruins the neighborhood.
And then I felt bad about watching it.
Son of a bitch, Sky. Oh, man. You really... Damn.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
But I don't know. I mean, that's just one read. I don't know. I mean, I think it could be
I think it makes sense.
A lot.
Yeah.
I think it really makes sense.
Yeah.
Damn. That's interesting. I'm going to have to chew on that.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to think about that one for a little while.
I'm sorry.
Just ruined Nosferatu.
Immediate amended temporary score of a 2.5 until I can figure out how I feel about it. Son of a bitch. Wow. No, that's good.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that.
But it is interesting, though. I mean, the film itself was interesting. Beyond that, I thought they did a great job at telling the story the way that they were going to tell it. And I loved the very end with the puff of smoke, where he's just like fading, and then he disappears, and there's just a little smoke pile on the ground.
I loved it. It was so great. Oh my god, I love that.
Laughing so hard. I
think one of the other things that you get to see with this movie versus Caligari is the fact that, like, I think that sometimes people think of silent film as having only certain ways of doing things. First off, I think that people obviously forget that silent films had any color, period.
Yeah.
B, I think that a lot of them think that it's either sepia or black and white, when really you also had literally just full tintings like pink and blue and red. And so I think that I think that both of these films do provide, as a pairing, a really interesting way to see how the same genre was happened 2 years apart, within completely different hands, and how that medium and how that format could be used in entirely different ways, and how also there were different innovations even in that time period that led to different techniques.
Because you're right, like I thought they did such a wonderful job of like creating a different sense of like time of day and even kind of like mood with, like the sort of like cool blues whenever they were outside, or there was, like something sort of like nefarious afoot, and then like the sort of yellow light from like candlelight or the sun. And then, like dawn and dusk be sort of like in between hours as like a sort of pink tone. I really loved that. I thought it was such a clever way of like, in a medium where it might be somewhat difficult at times to tell like what time of day this is supposed to be set in, of like very clearly visually like delineating that and kind of setting different sort of visual tones for each.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that they actually went on location for a lot of it. Like a lot of it really was location based. I thought that was wonderful, but I was also kind of missing because I've seen Der Golem and I've seen Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I want to see a lot more German expressionist films. I haven't really seen too much. But I was hoping to see some of those geometric shapes and a lot more of those harsh shadows,
really
but
any of that.
there wasn't. And I think, once you get to the point where Nosferatu is, you got that classic shot of him ascending the staircase and he's using the shadow to look even bigger than he is. Great stuff. Great stuff. But I thought they could have done some great work if they used geometric shapes to their advantage.
I agree. I think they could have done more with that, especially like in his kind of like castle and things like that. I think I was hoping like interior wise to get more of that same sort of like visual sense to sort of like lend itself. And like I didn't mind it as much in the scenes where he was kind of like out and about, like because I think it is good to have him as sort of like visually different from everyone else. But I was hoping that you would get a little bit more of that visually and like sort of, like his like realm, so to speak. And get a little bit more of that kind of like weirdness and that sort of like visual difference. Yeah.
But I did love the static shots of him just standing. Like when he is just, standing there looking awkward and terrifying.
Creepy.
So creepy.
Oh my God. There's this scene where he has like moved and he's living across the street from them, which is hilarious to me. And he's just in the fucking window. And
I know.
And he's like barely moving, and it's like so unsettling. And I was like, oh my God. It's so good.
Yeah.
So Sky, what would you give Nosferatu?
I don't know. I'd say probably right now, because I've only seen it once. I would say maybe 3.5. Maybe 3.5 for me.
I would say I'm gonna give it a 4. Remove a point for basically just copy pasting 100% plagiarizing someone else's work. But there's like also one thing I really did like is I felt like there were almost like elements of sort of like a campiness, like with a poof of smoke and stuff like that I just found like very funny and
yeah.
I think it was like a little bit more tightly told, a little bit more modern, it felt like at times. But no, I really enjoyed it. I think it's like a more fun film to watch. It's a good laugh. I loved it, and Max Schreck absolutely kills it. I'm like obsessed with his performance in that.
Yeah, he was tremendous.
No, yeah. And if you see like the actual picture of the actor, he looks nothing at all like Orlok. And it's incredible makeup work, and so the other thing that you do get with both of these films is 2 incredible performances: Conrad Veidt as Caesar and Max Schreck as Orlok, of incredible actors in makeup who understand physicality and understand how to use that physicality to either incredible movement or incredible stillness, both of which to incredible effect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Max Schreck, he was great. Like he was amazing, and I do agree with the campiness. The movie's still so fresh that I just kind of forgot about some of the campiness that was in it. But the performance of Hargrave, which is how I know him because that's how Tubi had it. Whatever his name was in the version you guys watched, he was great too, because he really was. I kind of picture it, if it was made today, it would be like Paul Rudd, because he was just so aloof. Yeah.
100%. Werner Herzog remade this movie in '79 as well.
Yeah.
So if you ever want to see also how, like, for the listeners, how the same story is handled, there you have it. Go and watch the 22 and then the 79.
I know. I grew up on a movie called Salem's Lot, and and I think The Vampire, the Master, that they use in that movie very much resembles Nosferatu in this film, which I thought was very interesting that they went that route. You know, and then there's also the show, the series that came out a couple of years ago, Nos number 4, Atu. You know, that existed for a little bit too. Nothing like the movie, but you know,
honestly,
it's about vampires.
It does indeed.
Honestly, I also thought that the vampire creature that the alchemist becomes in Kronos, if you've seen that, we talked about that last week. I thought that the body of it looked very much more like an Orlok vampire. It's this weird white, muscular, you know, sort of sinewy, weird thing. Which is also, I think, kind of the basis for the vampires of Penny Dreadful as well. This form of vampire clearly has sticking power, much like the imagery of Caligari has.
Yeah, I always like seeing, because I feel like there's like 2 ways people go with vampires. It's either like very human and just kind of like sexy smolder vampire, but I also really like it when they lean a little bit more into like the monstrous aspect of it. Like, I think you see it and like Buffy, they can transform into like the creepy looking dudes, or like in those
30 Days a Night.
30 Days a Night, like very very creepy, otherworldly looking, or Penny Dreadful even. And I always think it's like interesting seeing that visually, and also like kind of wondering what that means about the story that particular like writer or director is trying to tell, and why they leaned into one versus the other.
No, for sure. Because, you know, for Dracula in Francis Ford Coppola's, when he has not fed really thoroughly in a while and really gone through that full process, he looks a little bit more abnormal with the ultra white skin and the ultra white hair. But then once he feeds thoroughly and once he sleeps, then he's fully rejuvenated. And then once he's essentially, you know, like gotten back into it, he's then finally like at his sexiest.
Yeah, I love it when filmmakers do that, right? Like, this isn't anything like this movie, but Hostel, I don't know if you guys have watched Hostel, but like, you know, when they go and they see these girls, you know, in their heads, they're beautiful. They're like beautiful women. And then when they realize what's going on and they meet them in the warehouse again, like you start to see like their flaws that they have on their face. And it's very interesting how filmmakers play with that.
No, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But Paul, what was your rating? I don't think you gave your rating on it, did you? Did I mess you up? Did you have a 5?
No, I was still gonna probably come in low. I don't know where I want to put it now. I'll go 3.5.
It's very interesting. I did really enjoy it. I put my phone away from me because it is a silent film, and I think it's very easy to just kind of distract yourself. And I had to put it away out of arm's reach, and I just sat down and just absorbed myself into it. And I think you have to, if you do want to watch this film, get your electronic devices away from you. You know, and I think that applies with any silent film you know, because there's not much to grab your attention.
No, and with like the words pop up on the screen, like the first time I tried watching Dr. Caligari, I had my phone with me and I had to be like, God damn it, and like just put it away, because I would like look down for a second and something like someone texted me, and then I missed like a whole thing of text, and I was like, man, I gotta go back.
Yeah, they can't reveal it anymore in dialogue.
Nope.
No exposition for you. Yeah,
you gotta go back to figure out what you missed.
No, that's fair. No, I think that they're both great. Neither of them are things that I necessarily go back to, but I do think that Nosferatu is probably the more watchable for a modern audience.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah,
that is very fair. You know, it really was like, I remember the Van Helsing part, and he's talking about carnivorous plants. And I was like, that's interesting, but I don't know where this came from.
Correct.
Like this just came out of nowhere.
Yes.
You know, so I was like, what if they just took that part out? What would I really think about the movie at this point? Like, what is it adding to it? And I think it really was like, we just want to show on camera this Venus flytrap eating this fly.
I think there were a couple moments in the film where when we talked about like they have like what is like the hyena that shows up at one point, and it's like, why would that be there? And I kind of feel like they were just sort of like, let's put some cool shit on screen because we can.
A hyena showed up on set, guys. We got to film it.
We gotta specifically, but we were talking too, and I was like, I wonder how many people that was like the first time they'd ever seen like a hyena,
and they probably didn't know what the fuck it was.
Yeah. They
were like,
what
in the fuck am I seeing on screen? I have never seen that wild dog thing ever.
Probably maybe the thing with the Venus flytrap thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that just blew people's minds. They were like, holy shit, plants can do murders.
Yeah. You know, before we wrap, I did want to talk quickly about a movie called Fright Night, 1980s.
Yes!
Love Fright Night so much. It's on my watch list for Halloween because I just love it. You know, but you're talking about pretty and you know, horrific vampires, and I think that movie does a great job at showing you both. Right. You have Chris Sarandon, you have the Smolder. He's like the epitome of 80s hotness, right? Like the dude's a good looking dude.
Yeah.
And then you have, you know, when he transforms,
it's
like this
hideous,
awful monster, you know. And then Evil Ed, you know, he does a little weird thing.
He looks a little weird to begin with. No offense to Ed. Right. Vampire transformation did not.
It didn't work for him. It didn't work. The spiky hair didn't work.
No, that was not good.
But they did a good job at showing both worlds, I think.
I agree. I totally agree. I just love that movie so fucking much. It's again, talk about campy. It's so good.
It's a perfect film. It's perfect.
No, I think that's a good example also of for me a remake of another classic horror film that I think kind of got a little bit overlooked because I don't think people realized how much of it was about the housing crisis.
No, the remake of Fright Night?
Yeah.
David Tennant was amazing.
David Tennant is amazing. Yes.
It's not as good as the first one, but I think that it gets a little bit overlooked and written off as just like, oh, another shit like remake. But I think that it has more going on than like the Friday the 13th remake.
Wow.
Dude, Toni Collette, Colin Farrell, David Tennant.
Great cast.
Anton Yelchin.
Anton Yelchin.
Is really, really
Imogen
good.
Poots, I think. Great movie.
Yeah.
I liked it. It's not as good as the OG, but I still thought it was like a very, very good film. And yes, David Tennant just kills it.
So charismatic.
The shit out of it, and it's beautiful, and I loved it.
I guess on that note, honestly, the only other thing that I wanted to mention, truthfully, was a little update since I have been giving continued coverage on the IATSE strike.
Yeah.
So they almost, the top of the group kind of came to an early tentative agreement that then the media very much hyped up as like an agreement. But the group hadn't, the group overall, the different voting bodies of the IATSE, right, because it's broken up into different union groups, hadn't seen the agreement yet, and essentially they found it lacking because even though it included a guaranteed, I believe, 52-hour weekend, and I think guaranteed like 10 or 12-hour turnaround between shoots, they still found it lacking overall. So they went back to the negotiating table kind of with that, and there has been an update, and it's now going to be voted upon by the group at large, but essentially it is a wage increase for several different groups of people for streaming specific video, along with video at large, but especially the streaming side of it. And it's going to, over the next 4 to 5 years, increase the bottom most paid people from essentially like around 19 an hour to like 26 an hour. So that's a
great.
little, yeah. That's a little update for you. You can, of course, look further into it. I'll probably find some sort of credible link maybe to post, so that way you can look at the agreement further. But, you know, it's proof that solidarity and transparency also in what's being talked about is the way that you get positive change in a movement. And I think that they're doing a bang up job, and I'm glad to see progress happen in an industry, especially since, you know, today especially we had like 2 different Warner Brothers stories break about,
That was crazy.
You know, toxic culture. And, you know, one is a confirmation of the Ray Fisher story, and another one is just what happened on the set of Batgirl, and they've already fired back. I'll cover that one more probably next week when we have more details. But, you know, at a time when it's obvious that the studio is behaving badly, it is nice to see the people who that sort of behavior affects the most fighting back and reclaiming a little bit of dignity in the workplace.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Before I leave, I do want to say, just kind of recap what I have watched recently. So I guess this month has been obviously filled with horror, but ones that have really stood out for me have been the series Midnight Mass, of course. I watched Saint Maud for the first time. Loved it so much. That last frame of that movie,
incredible. Oh my god,
is
I'm obsessed.
insane.
It is.
Let's see. I watched VHS 94 on Shudder. That was fun. I like all the VHS films, so I thought they were pretty good. I watched Seance, and then I watched Censor. I finally watched Censor because that was on. I watched it on Hulu. It was wild. What a wild ride.
Yes.
Very creative. Very, very interesting ideas.
I loved how it leans so heavy into like giallo and stuff too. Like visually,
Yeah.
I thought it was like a stunning.
Visually, it was amazing, and I loved the ideas that were presented. I think there were a couple of moments where I may have just gotten confused or a little lost. But I think since this is like her first directorial debut, she is someone to look out for.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes. Amazing.
She's going to have a great career, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I have watched. What have you guys watched? I want to know.
Oh, okay. Well, so also again like Saint Maud and Censor, both of which I'm like totally obsessed with. I think they're such intriguing.
I think Saint Maud is a perfect film. Like I really think it's.
I 100% agree. It is a perfect movie. And I really like the idea of like watching those two together, because I think in some senses they're like very similar in that it's like 2 women sort of dealing with trauma and also sort of like madness of various types. I loved both of them. Such good movies. Obviously watched Nosferatu this month. I'm trying to think of like anything else that's like newer. Oh, I watched Brand New Cherry Flavor.
I want to watch that. It's on my list.
It's absolutely wild. I loved it. Very, very good. Highly recommend. It's definitely kind of trippy, but I loved it. Really, really good. So highly recommend that to anyone.
The actress in it is great. I don't know if you guys have watched Undone, but she's amazing. She's amazing.
I think the only thing I've seen her in is like Alita Battle Angel.
Alita, yeah.
No, she was absolutely fantastic in this though. She was great. Highly recommend watching that show. I'm trying to think of like anything else that's like.
Oh, the remake of Slumber Party Massacre was amazing.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet. That's on my list. I want to see.
It was a lot of fun. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Although I have read some horror, and I did recently read Carmilla, which was very, very good, and predates Dracula by like 20 years.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Someone was influenced.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, no. Highly recommend that. It's like very short, so I guess if you want to do like some horror reading,
Yeah.
definitely check that out.
Okay.
And Flanagan is going to be doing, talking about adapting, but Flanagan is going to be adapting The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yes, which I'm very
excited about that. Yeah.
Yes.
Paul, what have you watched?
Lord. So obviously the stuff that I've really been watching is mostly the content that I've been making. So if you want to know what I've been watching and how I feel about it, go back.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I've been honestly trying to get. I gave myself the impossible task of the slasher extravaganza, and so
you're going through all the Nightmare films, right, and all the Friday the 13th films and the Halloween
I
films.
have watched every Halloween movie except the Rob Zombie ones. I had to take a little Halloween break.
Mm-hmm.
I am currently at Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and Friday the 13th 3. I just watched Friday the 13th Part 3 today. Loved the 3D effects.
The snake, right?
Oh,
Coming
yeah,
at the camera.
and the yo-yo especially
and the yo-yo
was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So I still have like 20 movies, 19 movies left to go of both of those franchises. Plus, I'm trying to actually, since he's the only black slasher, I'm trying to also do the other Candyman movies. Yeah. So I've got a fucking mountain that I've been trying to slowly make my way through. So that's what I've been watching most immediately.
Yeah.
I've already decided next month every episode is one movie an episode.
Yeah. That's impressive, though. I mean, I think it's crazy, but I think it's impressive nonetheless. I watched the Candyman movies pretty recently. I watched the first 3 Hellraisers pretty recently. I haven't seen the new Candyman yet. I really want to, though.
I really like the first one, and I'm interested in this new one.
The first one is great.
Yeah. I saw Halloween Kills. That's the newest movie that I have seen.
We got to talk about that at some point. Because I've given you my thoughts.
Sky, I'm 1,000 words into my essay on Halloween Kills. So, and I'm not done. I absolutely love it. The theater that we were thinking about going to was pretty busy, and I just still don't feel 100% comfortable if it's like a busy theater. So I ended up just paying the $5 for a month of Peacock. I'm gonna cancel it in like 2 weeks. And Lauren and I watched it that night, and I was floored by it. And we woke up the next day and I watched it again.
Wow.
So I've seen it twice already. I may watch it a third time. I'm trying to convince my mom to watch it. So
for sure. I'll watch it with you.
Yeah, hell yeah. That's one.
There you go.
That's probably the newest thing that I've seen, and
now,
damn, have I.
Your wife is in the background, right? Somewhere off to the side. I have not seen her yet.
No, yeah, she's over here.
And what's her name?
Lauren.
Lauren. Hi, Lauren. You've been a voice. I haven't really seen you, though.
Yeah.
Did you like it? Did you like Halloween Kills?
Sky wants to know if you enjoyed Halloween Kills.
Oh, I did. I did very much. It's brutal. I hated it, but I loved it. But I hated it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I mean, I hear that, though. I hear that a lot on the internet, that it is, very brutal. And I agree. I think it is brutal. But I also, I think we can probably do a whole podcast about this real fast. But I don't think that it's as brutal as some of the other instances of the series, especially the 2018 film with that bathroom sequence. I think
the
was
bathroom
just
sequence pretty bad.
Insane. I watched it again when Halloween Kills came out, and I was just remembering, like, 2018, I didn't really feel uncomfortable watching it. When I'm watching it now, I was like, yeah, I don't really, this makes me feel weird. Like, this just makes me feel so awkward.
Well, I think when I was rewatching Halloween Kills one of these times, I went back and I was thinking about Halloween, and I think so much of Halloween Kills in a weird way manages to go back and enrich the first Halloween, at least for me. Two people demand Michael speak in Halloween. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on a jag. And I could probably put this in the slasher extravaganza, but this is kind of just, I guess, a teaser of where my brain is at with it. Two people demand Michael speak in Halloween. It's the podcaster, and it is Dr. Sartain.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them want him to speak for them. And both of them want him to say different things because both of them are compelling him to speak for different reasons. I think that the podcaster is looking for either some sort of humanity or some sort of confirmation of a monster.
Yeah.
And I think that Dr. Sartain is looking for some sort of answer as to why he's a monster. I think both of them are missing the fact that violence is how he speaks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's why both of them get treated to particularly brutal examples of how Michael speaks.
He stomped that dude's head in.
Yes.
Like, that was crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Michael Myers is so iconic. I think it really could be, if you look at a film like Halloween Resurrection with Busta Rhymes and Tyra Banks, some people really love that film.
It's so much fun.
I am not one of those people. And I think it really is, like if you put Michael Myers on the screen, no matter what it is, people are just going to love it. Some people are really just going to love it. Same thing applies with like Leatherface, Chucky, all the big icons. Doesn't matter what kind of movie it is.
They're like Iron Man or Batman or Superman, but for an entirely different group of people.
Yeah.
Some people really love Iron Man too. I don't know them, but I'm sure that they exist.
You're talking to one.
That's another day. That's another. I can't.
That's a whole nother. No, I think I have to come onto your show at some point, and we'll have a good little chat.
Please do. Yeah. We can really have fun, I think, with Halloween, and Iron Man 2, because now I'm very interested.
Yeah. Sky is available at the weekly pop-up. Madelaine, I'll post whatever socials you feel comfortable, I guess, with me posting. And Sky, I'll share your stuff. As always, follow us at the Film Buds Podcast at Instagram or the Film Buds at Twitter. Send us listener questions, send us movie suggestions. I actually have one that I'm still trying to work into the content calendar somehow. I haven't figured out yet. But thanks as always for listening. Tune in next week, which should be our slasher extravaganza episode, and you'll find out if I made it to the end of my mountain of homework. But as always, thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.